Greater Than 0% is a 501c3 nonprofit that's on a mission to share stories of organizations from around the world that are changing lives. We have weekly episodes featuring amazing nonprofits and monthly episodes interviewing top business executives. You can find us at gtzp.org on your preferred streaming or social media platforms.
Alrighty, thanks everybody for tuning into this episode. Today we have Anthony Marinos, who's the Director of Business Development and Partnerships at Charity Water. Anthony, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Joseph. This is great. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So as always, we like to hear a little bit mission statement of the organizations we interview first. So what is the mission of Charity Water?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of hit our name right on the nose, as you might guess. We are a charity that brings water to communities around the world. But our main mission truly is to bring clean water to every person on the planet. And it's something we feel like we can achieve in our lifetime. Yeah, it's worth touching on, like, even how we're uniquely structured, where 100% of all of our public donations go directly to the field. And the way that we're able to do that is we have a group of private donors who we've lovingly dubbed the Well, because we love water puns at Charity Water. And the Well is now about 130, 135 individuals, families, and even some companies. And they fund our operational expenses, like our salaries, flights, laptops. They cover those costs, even credit card fees on the website, so that 100% of everything we raise publicly goes directly to bringing clean water to people. That's very much related to our transparency and proof as well. If you go on our website, you'd see a map that shows all of the projects we've ever funded. And, we prove every project with photos, GPS coordinates, and the exact number of community members per project. We think that's really important. That's been something from day one that we wanted to make sure we can help connect our mission to the donors, because it's oftentimes quite a foreign concept. So many of our donors are in the US and in Europe, and this is not a problem that they face on a daily basis. So we from the beginning, we wanted to make sure there's that direct transparency into where the money's going. Right. And then another, thing that's worth mentioning is just our brand in general is focused on hope and optimism and a brighter future. A lot of nonprofits focus on gloom and doom and shame and guilt. The ASPCA ads. I love the ASPCA. They do great work. But having the ads where it's the Sarah McLachlan song and the dogs and cats crying.
Yes.
That's a bit of a different angle. Charity Water tends to focus on all the positives. And so we empower our donors and have them excited about seeing a world in which this water crisis ceases to exist as we know it. So,
all right. Well, we'll get into that because I have a lot of questions. But before we do, why you?
There are a lot of different ways to try to reach people. We just really choose to focus on the optimistic side, the empowerment side. I guess the best example of that is that when we started the organization, there were 1.1 billion people who lacked access to clean water. Now, in just under 17 years, it's 703 million, which is still a huge number. But that means about 400 million people got access to clean water in like a decade and a half. So when you think about it that way, it's like, whoa, this is something we actually can solve. It's not. Yeah. It's not this kind of dark cloud that will hang over humanity forever. It's like, no, actually, we could see this end in our lifetimes. So. Yep.
Wow. Well, I want to get into the details of that. But before we do, why you? Why is this something that you've decided to pursue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my background is in the for-profit world. Like I worked for a lot of startups, most notably Zipcar when it was fairly new still. And all of my positions have been in marketing, sales, customer acquisition, business development. I realized I don't think I never really thought about this until I saw the job description for my current role. I I wasn't sure if I wanted to work for a nonprofit. I knew I wanted to do something in the social impact space. And I came across this charity water position, and the description really spoke to me. And it talked about, in the business development role, like working with all these different partners, corporate partners, businesses, to generate revenue and awareness for the brand, and it'd be developing these partnerships from scratch. And when I graduated college, I had wanted to work at a creative agency. I thought that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And I loved the idea of being able to work with different brands that I knew, that I loved, that I was learning about, and pitching their product and coming up with creative ways to do that. And so when I saw this job description, it was almost a full circle moment for me, where I was like, wow, like this is wild. Like, it's kind of exactly what I wanted to do years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's not selling products, it's selling clean water access. So the best of both worlds. So when I saw that position, I jumped on it. I joke that I must have just gotten lucky. I slipped through the cracks, I guess. I think we must have been desperate, and because I had no nonprofit experience previously, but my sales and marketing skills, all those roles previously translated very well to this job. And that was 6.5 years ago. And I haven't looked back, not once.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. It's the best organization I've ever worked at. I think it will ultimately, at the end of my career, no matter what happens, be the best place I ever worked, period.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Wow, that's saying a lot too. Thank you for sharing that origin story. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening, and if they're feeling like they're not like 100% happy with where they're at, it's cool to hear a story like yours of the kind of shift from the startup atmosphere, corporate side, to the nonprofit side. So great. So one thing I want to start getting to some of the comments you mentioned. You said the 100% model, and you did a good example of explaining that. Why is that a model that Charity Water thinks is important?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So sometimes people are concerned across the sector that it's like a demonization of ops, so to speak, that we're trying to make it sound like any funding towards operations is bad, which is not the case. The reason that we're structured this way, and I think really a lot of nonprofits would agree with this, is that people don't trust charities still. So especially when Scott, our founder, started the organization, he was reading and learning all these statistics and seeing that people just did not have faith in the organizations they were supporting. And these were like big organizations. They also felt like there was a disconnect. They didn't know where the money was going. And it made them hesitant to want to contribute. And so for Scott, I think being someone who was coming from, he also, his origin story is wild. He was a club promoter that then became, the CEO of Charity Water. And he knew he needed to build people's trust early, and he wanted to combat that kind of negative sentiment or feeling about the sector as a whole. And so he felt like the cleanest way to do it would be to have two accounts. Like, you're either giving to water or you're giving to ops. And like, we're making that crystal clear for you.
That's awesome.
And then over time, that's what grew into, it was a little touch and go for a while. Like, it was kind of hard to get people to give to ops when you had this really appealing model of like, just fund water. Like, we won't take anything from your donation out. And then that led to some major donors stepping up and like creating the WELL program. And that's been the kind of an anchor or core piece of who we are ever since.
Yeah. We've interviewed probably 140 or so nonprofits to this point, and some of the nonprofits that we've interviewed that have programming or funds that go towards like digging wells, for example, for countries that are very, very low income, impoverished, and we haven't interviewed any of the major ones that participate in that area, but they did mention, the ones that we've interviewed, that a dollar goes a lot further via their organization to build a well versus some of the very large, big cogs and wheels,
Sure.
where it costs 10x, 100x to dig a well, just because there's so much that goes into it, versus organizations that are boots on the ground with the communities, that know exactly the people, the people that are going to be building it, the communities that it's going to be serving. So it's a little bit different. So I could see that as well, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's kind of the world we live in at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting too what you touched on about the boots on the ground. That's a very unique element of our programmatic approach, which is that we raise all these funds publicly and then we invest them in local NGOs or local chapters of global NGOs within the countries where we work. And that's something that we've been doing from the beginning as well. I think Scott recognized very early on, where he's like, well, I'm not, like, our team isn't going to be going out and drilling wells in rural Ethiopia and rural Uganda. Like, that would be totally a disservice, not only to the communities we're trying to help, because we're not the full experts in that. It's like, we need those implementing partners who know the communities. They know that they have strong connections with the government in terms of being able to do that important, vital work.
Right.
They speak the language. They maybe grew up in some of the areas where water access was a problem for them as a child. And so we've seen this model, we've leaned on that a lot and seen it grow quite dramatically from the beginning. We now have 55 local partners that we've worked with across the 29 countries that we've historically been in. And that's been huge for us. Like, that's kind of the best way to be as efficient and effective, to your point, with donor dollars.
Right. And then the transparency importance that you have on your model, is that similar reasoning for why 100% of the donations, like, people want to know where their dollar goes, how many gallons of water, of fresh water, it's produced for community, or what percent of a well has their donation. I'm not sure how you guys measure it, but
we do. We really have that direct reporting where we're showing people exactly where the money went. Here are the communities it helped. Here are pictures of the projects. And we do that for donors and supporters that are even giving a small amount. So even if when you fundraise for us, even when you think you didn't do a great job, like, sometimes people are bummed out. They're like, I only raised $100. And it's like, well, first of all of that money went to water. And second of all, in about 1.5 to 2 years, you're going to wind up with a little completion report that shows, hey, that $100, like, we allocated that towards these projects. Like, this was part of it. You weren't the sole funder of it, of course, but you were a big part of helping make that happen. And you're exactly right. Like, we really have done that to combat that fear of where the money's going and the distrust, but also that connection to the mission. Like, we don't have like a Habitat for Humanity model or some of those larger volunteer opportunities where people can go and see it. We're not doing that. Like, that's not what we're focused on. And we're very mindful too of protecting the communities and not making it something inappropriate in that way of like voyeurism, so to speak. So instead, we focus on making sure they have that strong connection to the mission by seeing exactly what's happening.
Right. Wow. I want to go back to a comment you meant about the global numbers of clean water access. You said it has decreased from, you said 1.3 billion.
It was 1.1. It was 1.1 billion. And now the latest numbers came out recently. It just dropped down again. It was at 771 million for really like the last year and change. It now was reduced again to 703 million. And this is for people who lack basic access. So there's nothing. And that's why we focus on rural, remote regions, because those are the communities that are the most vulnerable, where they're often having to journey hours, sometimes a day, to collect water, and ultimately that's water that's making them sick. It's not even a clean source. So that is the number that the UN, and this is coming from like the UN and World Health Organizations, about like this is the number we're trying to change, where if we can get that down to zero, then you start to evolve it like, well, how do these water systems improve? Like, how do you build local municipality, local municipal systems that become similar to small towns that we'd be more familiar with, and there are taps in homes and things like that. But basic access, it's 703 million that we're still like, that is what we're looking to achieve, bringing that down to zero. So,
and then how Charity Water's contribution to that, is that measurable too at this point?
It is, yeah. Well, funny you should ask. We also have some good numbers recently. We're celebrating our 17th birthday in a couple weeks. It's September 7th, and so that's a big milestone for us. But in that time, we've now raised about somewhere between like 750 and 800 million that we've raised for water and ops over that time. Right. And that has helped us now fund over 137,000 water projects across 29 countries. And that's bringing clean water to 17.4 million people. So we're
17.4 million. That's huge.
It's huge. And like, it's wild to see the growth that we've had even in this time I've been here. So when I started at the organization, we had our biggest year ever. We raised 50 million that year in 2017, and we were hovering around like 7 million people with clean water access. Now, 6.5 years later, we're raising about 100 million a year, and we're now punching up towards 20 million people served. I remember when we celebrated the 10 million milestone, and now we're already like, oh my gosh, we're within the next, really, it's within the next year or two, we could be about 20 million people with access to clean water just from the Charity Water community alone.
Jeez. Wow. What do you think has contributed? Obviously, there's many things, but what are the top few things that have contributed to the success of the growth, the scale, the impact?
I think a lot of it does have to do with our model. The kind of fresh approach that we take to the charity world. It's also something where we've tried to embrace newer ideas and newer technology in how we market our mission. So very early on, Scott and the team were very focused on embracing different forms of social media or new tools and ideas that for-profits were using and using effectively. And so we did have some really fun milestones and achievements early on of like, we were the first charity to really use Instagram. We were the first charity to reach 1 million followers on Twitter, or excuse me, X. We've like we try to embrace those new forms of communication, because we do think that younger people, especially now more than ever, want to be engaged in these causes. They have the creativity, the ability, in some cases, the means even to have a direct impact through fundraising that they do, or even their own contributions. I think, this generation now is more generous than any generation before, and it'll continue, I think, to happen that way. Like, we just continue to get more and more focused on the right things. And generosity is a big part of that. So I think focusing on people at younger stages of life, earlier stages of life, has been huge. I also think the cause itself, it is not controversial in any shape or form. There's no argument that could be made against what we're doing.
The need for clean water.
I mean, listen, people could argue it. I wouldn't want to hang out with that person. I wouldn't want to be around that person, to each his own, I guess. But that idea about access to clean water, it is a universal human right. Everyone on earth, it feels, can agree to this, and they want to help. So I think that's what's been, Scott often will reference this and talk about this, that like it's a great unifier in that way, that you can have supporters from all different walks of life, different political affiliations, different parts of the world, like people who just could not be more different in their everyday lives, agreeing on something like water. And I think there are a bunch of causes like that, you know, hunger, I think shelter, the basic needs, of course. And then anything related to children and education, like there are a lot of causes like that in the world that I think everyone really agrees on. I also think there are a bunch of causes in the world that people should not be divided on, but that's a different, that's a totally different topic. You know, you would like to think there'd be more unity in that way, but water is certainly, we feel good about that for sure. And that's helped in a huge way.
I think the only potential contentious response that I've heard in this sector, even in this specific area of water, is why don't you focus on our country first before going to a different country's clean water? Is that something that Chris or your organization's been asked frequently at all, or does it not come up much? Or is it the obvious response, well, there's a much higher need in these areas and there's a potential to affect millions versus a much lesser population? I wonder what a typical response to that would be.
It's such a good question. And honestly, like we're often thinking about it because we know that there are issues that come up even at home. So the number one issue people would bring up to us earlier on too was Flint, of course, like
right.
big in the, all over the news, you know, something that felt so close to home. Could have been any town in the US, and everyone's disappointment in that and focus on that, it was justified. Like we totally agree. I think the main difference is when there is an issue like that in a place like Flint, those communities can get water and their children and their families and they won't get sick. They won't suffer from different illnesses that could result in dehydration and then death. Like there was an issue with lead in the water and contaminating it and Legionnaire's disease and people getting ill. And that was horrible. But that's like a gigantic infrastructure problem that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to fix. That the government, you know, honestly, it's like the governments need to be better about that. And like that was just a total absurd thing that happened. Very poor management, poor decision making. They were trying to save money. The local like switching the water source to the different pipes and using old pipes that were not made for that. And the acidity, it was the pH levels in the water that eroded the lead because it was a different pH level.
Yeah.
So when you look at that issue, it's like, well, we have to make a choice. Like if we're going to have the biggest impact possible and try to help the most people, it's the rural, remote communities in the most water-stressed countries in the world, which is they're all in it's sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. You know, countries like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, Rwanda, you know, Ethiopia, Uganda, I mentioned before. In Asia, it's India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Cambodia, Laos, Nepal, like all these places where you have these communities that are just far removed from any large municipal system. And the way they're collecting water is totally different than what we're used to here. The only ones at home that would be closely related to like what we're solving for is there are about, I don't know if this number went down, but there were about 2 million people in the US who lacked basic access. And those people were all on Native American reservations.
Okay.
So it's like, which is a whole nother ridiculous topic of like, how is this possible that we would allow that to happen? But there are some great other organizations that focus like almost exclusively on that. One of them being Dig Deep, who's a really great, they're a great organization here in the US that's their sole focus. So when we get that, we talk about how much we value their input on this and that we agree no one on earth should lack access to clean water. We've just had to make the decision to focus solely on really the most vulnerable populations and where we can have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
So we never say never. There might be situations where, given climate change and how things are different, it's like you could wind up in a situation where California is a place where people need water access, and we need to go back to kind of bare bones plans in some communities. But as it stands right now, our focus is purely international.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. The future, Charity Water. What is the future look like? What does it look like? What are some of the upcoming plans that you all have?
Yeah, I mean, the future is bright, that's for sure. We certainly talk a lot about how the best is yet to come. And I think that's really tied to what I mentioned earlier about how we really believe that this problem will be solved in our lifetime. So I think zeroing in on that goal is purely our focus of how can we see this cease to exist, at least as it stands, that basic access premise. So when we look ahead, it's really rooted in some rapid growth. Like, we're thrilled to be at the position we're at now, raising around 100 million a year, bringing clean water to 2, in some cases 2.5 million people a year, really trying to grow that. So we want to see that go up to, how do we make it 200 million a year, 300 million a year? How do we help 5 million, 7 million people in a single year? There are some huge aspirational goals from Scott and our executive team around, taking a huge chunk of the remaining people who lack access. Like, how do we wind up in a place where we impact 70 million people? 100 million people, is that even possible? Well, it's certainly something that we're going to go for, because we feel like we have the ability, we have an incredible donor community. We have that opportunity before us of taking a huge chunk of it. And another really cool thing that we've been focusing on is that idea of people making long-term commitments, people, families, family foundations, and companies, of drawing a line in the sand and saying, we want to sign up to bring clean water to 1 million people just from our family, something like that. So that's been a big pitch of ours now, is this idea of 1 million lives. How can you as a company, how can you as a family foundation sign up and commit to this over time, knowing that it's going to take, it can take 10 years or 15 years or something like that, but having people look at the big picture and think about that legacy they can have. So that's that to me is a really big part of the future, and also new products and approaches that we're adding in, just on the legacy giving side, we've been taking a more strategic approach to that, getting more and more people signed on to want to donate to us, posthumously, donating portions of their estate, or committing to things in their will, something that we weren't really doing a lot of. And that's proving to be really, really impactful. There are a lot of people that are interested in that, and they see that as an opportunity, when they're no longer here. So I think the bigger we get, there's going to be more of those, essentially folding in some of those traditional elements of fundraising that we haven't done before, but making them Charity Water-esque, like our own take on them.
Wow. People that are listening and are inspired and want to get engaged, what type of engagement do you look for? It sounds like you've highlighted a few of them. You're painting the big picture of getting foundations and companies to impact 1 million people themselves. Other folks outside of that target, how could they get engaged and involved?
So there are so many different ways. First and foremost, if you don't have the money to support us, spreading awareness about our mission is a huge deal. I think a lot of nonprofits have been great about mentioning this to supporters who are potentially not in a financial position to support, telling a friend, telling a neighbor, your family, posting about us on social if you saw a piece of content that you really liked. That's very helpful. Like that's how we're able to reach the audiences that we do. So any of those referrals are great. If you are able to contribute, going onto our website, charitywater.org, and signing up to create a profile and become a member of the Spring, which is our monthly giving program. So the Spring, you can join for as low as $10 a month. It might even be lower now, but you can just sign up and have this subscription for good, ultimately, where each month your dollars are going towards clean water, and your 100% of your gift is helping provide clean water to people in need. So the Spring is great, and there are about 70,000 people in the Spring right now. So the more the merrier. I think that's a great way to get involved. Having a fundraiser for us is always huge. Like creating a fundraiser just for your community with a goal in mind. That's very helpful. You're tapping into your network to both spread awareness and raise funds for us. That's a big deal. And then it's thinking about other people or the company where you work or the company that you own or run. There are different ways to get involved. Like brands that's what I do. So you can always reach out to me directly, Anthony at charitywater.org. If you have a company and you want to get involved. But then on the like key relationship side, which is the individual donor side, if you're listening and you and your family, like you have a family foundation or you have big aspirations, we'd love to talk with you about what it looks like to fund and sponsor water projects.
Right.
And so on average across our charity water portfolio, a water project costs $10,000 to bring clean water to an entire community. And it's about $40 to bring clean water to one person. So when you're thinking about how you might be able to help, if you have the means, funding a project is incredible, but $40, it's really not that much, and to have that impact to be able to bring clean water to a person is quite meaningful. So lots of ways to get involved.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think we covered all the main points that I wanted to cover. Is there anything that we didn't want to cover or you want to share before we wrap up? And we'll share all the links to the social media and websites in the show notes here as well. Yeah. But just want to make sure we captured everything before we wrap it up.
I know this was great. I think that was really everything that we tend to cover when we're giving an intro to Charity Water and explaining what we do. I think for anyone listening, if you have a creative idea or a concept that you'd want to pitch us and you think there's something new that we should be trying, we're all ears. So that's the other thing is you can always just reach out to us. We have an incredible supporter experience team. So if you go to our website, you can fill out the contact form or even our partnerships page, charitywater.org/partnerships. If you have a company idea or a brand engagement idea, that's the other piece I should have mentioned before is like even just coming to us with cool, different ideas that would generate awareness and revenue for us, where you're maybe not even the one in control of that, but you just wanted to get the idea in front of us. Hugely helpful. We're it's going to take a huge effort. It's not just us doing this. There are a lot of great water NGOs, a lot of governments that have big commitments, and technology advancements have really helped us get to this position now. And that's what's going to help us take it home and see this problem cease to exist. So any and all help you can provide, we'd be really open to.
Amazing. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for your time and sharing the work that you are doing at Charity Water. I don't think I realized how massive of an impact you all are having going into this. So this is truly amazing to see, raising $100 million a year and impacting millions of lives with fresh water, and clean water is huge. So thank you so much for your time, Anthony, and sharing what you're doing and in the organization.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Thanks for listening to Greater Than 0%. To find more episodes or to have your organization featured on the podcast, you can find us at gtzp.org on your preferred streaming or social media platforms. Find your cause with Greater Than 0%.